One of the nutrients you'll want to watch in your soil sampling program this year is copper. So we would encourage you to take complete soil tests. Make sure you're looking at micronutrients because this one is really important for your crop.
Well, let's talk about 3 ways that it is important. First of all, copper is kind of considered the disease nutrient. If you have good levels of copper in your plant, you should be at least a little bit more tolerant to diseases. Second thing, with soybeans, we commonly see where the hulls are starting to fall off. So those seed coats are busting up. This happens commonly when you get big soybeans. Well, the key to seed coat resiliency is copper. If you don't have good copper levels, then that's where you see more of those hulls falling off in the grain wagon, maybe even in your combine. I mean, in the grain bin, as they come through an auger. You've got to have seed coat resiliency, and copper is the answer. The third thing is it has a lot to do with lodging issues on your farm. So yes, I realize by far and away number 1 is potassium, but copper is number 2 on that list. Copper is a big key to stalk strength.
Many farmers are trying to build copper levels in the soil up to about 2 parts per million. At 2 parts per million, they feel like they're getting a good return on their investment, where they're getting improvements out there, not only in disease control, but in how that crop stands and how that seed coat stretches. That's great, but the question is, how are you going to get that copper out in your fields, and how often are you going to have to be applying copper for your crops?
Well, how often you apply all depends on how much your crops are using. So the more yield you have, the more often you have to apply. But it doesn't take a lot of copper. You can look at the free Ag PhD fertilizer removal app for your smartphone or your tablet. Look at any crop that you are raising, and it'll tell you how much copper you actually need each and every year. The good thing with copper is it's very much like phosphorus and zinc in that it barely moves in soil. So in other words, if you put it out there, it's going to be there until your crop eventually uses it. So that's great. So you don't have lost money. I mean, like nitrogen, for example, you put too much out, odds are pretty slim that that nitrogen is going to be sitting there for you the following year if it is in excess. But the copper, yes, it will be there.
In terms of copper products that you can apply to your field, you can look at liquid products or you can look at dry products. There are quite a few different copper-containing fertilizer products for your farm. I would say this though, the dry products are typically a little bit cheaper, and if you're trying to build parts per million in your soil, I would generally recommend a broadcast application of a dry copper sulfate. That'd be the least money spent, and if you don't know exactly where your rows are going to be, this would provide enough copper no matter where you plant in that field.
Yeah, but you can also get a copper sulfate that will dissolve in water. You go spray that out. That's typically what we will do on our farm. You only have to do that once every 5 or 10 years generally. It doesn't take very much, very simple and easy to do. The only thing that we would tell you if you're going to do that is make sure your sprayer is cleaned out every single night. Do not let that copper sulfate sit in the tank or you're going to have problems, trust me. Get it cleaned out every single night and it will work great.
Now, of course, you could use a liquid product and try to foliar feed that into the crop, but here's the problem. Many of the copper-containing liquid products can burn leaves. So if you're trying to deliver a significant amount of copper to your plants, it's going to burn the foliage. You're not going to like it. In fact, we've tried some things in experiments trying different sources of copper, and in some cases we've really fried things where it looked kind of bad out in the field. So I would encourage you, if you can, treat the soil rather than treating the plants with copper.
Okay, now here's where I'm going to disagree with Darren. I love treating the plants with copper because copper foliar can be a bactericide, it can be a fungicide, it can be a foliar fertilizer. So you accomplish 3 things there. Just keep the rate low. And his whole point is don't get the rate too high, and I think that's where he was going. Just make sure you're using a low rate and you should be in good shape.
But the question is, how do you determine how much copper you need? Again, you have to go back to a good soil test, find out where you're starting with in the field, and with micronutrients, I'd recommend smaller grids as these micronutrient levels may vary throughout your field. Then you can come back with plant tissue analysis and try to see how much is actually getting into your plant tissue. As far as what parts of the plant that you want to pull, typically we're looking at the new growth to see what we're getting for copper levels in the plant. But I'm talking to more and more farmers each year who are saying, you know, I'm getting better results, more accurate results, pulling the whole plant. You can try both of those methods on your farm. Tissue analysis is really pretty cheap to do.
Yeah, but let's keep in mind, copper doesn't move well in the plant like NP and K do. For NP and K, if your plant is a little bit short at some growth stage, well, the plant will rob the extra NP and K out of the lower leaves of the plant. Doesn't work that way with copper. With copper, if your plant is short in the new growth, it's short in the new growth. That's just the way it goes, and now you are short overall in the plant. So I'm not a real big believer in this, oh, we're just going to average out the whole plant. I don't care about that. We have to have enough copper to feed each and every leaf, and we have to have enough copper to make sure that we have a good stock.
Well, one thing we can all agree on, copper is an important nutrient. It's an essential nutrient for crop growth. Make sure you're monitoring the levels of copper on your farm. Build them up if you need to in the soil to 2 parts per million or even a little better depending on what crop you're raising. And keep an eye on it with plant tissue analysis to make sure your plant's getting enough copper.
One of the weeds that will definitely take advantage of any copper you have in your soil is our Weed of the Week, but we'll show you how to control it coming up later in the show.